All right, very excited about this. Brian Kula, welcome to the podcast, mate. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, now listen, I had a great chat with Tony Holler a couple of weeks ago, and he was just a revelation to me. And I was kind of put onto him a few months prior to that, and people were saying you got to listen to this guy, and everything that he was touching on was just on point with a lot of the things that I had learned throughout my career as a professional athlete, and then into my coaching realm and world where I had coached some of the top sprinters in history in swimming, but there's still just a huge misunderstanding in swimming of sprint training, of power based training, of strength training, things like that apply to swimming, and I think track and field and some other sports are way ahead. And obviously your name came up, and he said, Brian's a guy that you got to talk to. So thanks for doing this today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tony and I are good friends. We kind of met, ironically, and I didn't even really know who he was. And he reached out to me because he had read an article on one of the NFL guys that I work with. And he said, "Hey, are you following my system?" And I was like, "Who are you?" I didn't even know who Tony was. But we had similar philosophies in, how to kind of go about training an athlete regardless of sport. And we just really hit it off and connected, as friends and, kind of colleagues in the industry. We have a lot of common thoughts, and
Yeah.
Tony's a great guy.
Yeah, I put up a clip where he was talking about you and Christian McCaffrey. I put that up on Instagram. I've got over 3 million views right now, so it's a popular topic, I'd imagine.
Hey, we'll
Yeah,
take those views, huh?
yeah, exactly. So
All right.
listen, well, tell me about your background, maybe with Christian, maybe just some background based
Sure.
on what you've been doing for the past 15, 20 years.
Sure. Yeah, I was a longtime high school track and field and football coach. I did some athletic directing and at a private school here in town called Valor Christian, kind of helped build that athletic program. And we were fortunate to have a whole bunch of really good athletes come through the school. I'd always had a curiosity around
Mhm.
athletic development, even from a young age. As a young coach, I was a head track coach at age 23, and never really had anybody out ahead of me. So I just did a lot of my own research, and I reached out to people that I respected and, I knew did it better than I did. Guys, like Tony Wells, Charlie Francis, Vince Anderson, all these sprint guys, because I wanted to be an elite sprint coach. And so
Mm.
through all those years, and then years of working in a weight room, as a day job with my teaching schedule, I just, you know, kind of experimented a lot, took things that I saw and tried to put them into practice, and threw out what I didn't like and kept what I liked. And over probably 25 years, formulated what I would call is our system. And that's
Mm.
obviously an evolving, changing space all the time. But we have some things that we like a lot. I met the McCaffrey family when I was young. Christian was just a seventh or eighth grader, I think, coming up. I coached his older brother in football, and then I obviously had Christian for 4 years in football and track there at Valor. He was a standout athlete. Went
Wow.
off to Stanford, and it was after his rookie year in the NFL. He reached out because he said, "Hey, I've realized in the NFL, speed is the name of the game. I have to get faster. So will you, take over my speed and strength work?" And I, of course, was half terrified, of like, hey, this kid's, number 8 draft pick. And, I know I can do some good work for you, but I've never really done that. And so we
Yep.
jumped in, and has a really good first couple of years, led up to his 2019 season where he went 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards rushing. Just had only been done by 2 other players in the league. And so we just had a good flow. And what we were doing, though, was very much kind of a blend of old school, good Eastern European, Russian training methodology of plyometrics and strength training and high speed sprinting. And I've just always been somebody that valued speed, maximum
Mm.
velocity, acceleration work for all athletes. And so, with that success came the launch of our business. COVID actually put us into business, believe it or
Mhm.
not. A lot of people got shut down. It was me and a few pro athletes training, and that grew into 150 kids training. And then we decided to start a business. And so we did that, and
Wow.
it went really well. People like our product. They like what we do. It's fun. We validate it by testing, by taking information and data on the athletes that we work with. And then we started to have other sports approach us. And one of them, was a swim organization. which I didn't have a ton of confidence, that what we did was going to help them. We just had a hunch that it would. And after the first year, that swim program broke 43 club records.
Wow.
And so since has rebroke all of those records in addition to another 20 or so, and got their first junior national qualifier. I mean, they have had all kinds of success. And the coach, Jim Bocci, really good guy and knows what he's doing in the pool, is just kind of blown away at how what we do from a training stance has impacted them in the water. So
what do you think the major things are then was it they come to you or you come to them and you meet in the middle and you say, okay, well, this is what you used to be doing. This is what I want you to do in the future. And then, all of a sudden they're breaking these records. They're doing fantastic work. But what are primarily some of the things that they had to change fundamentally?
Yeah, I think just the idea of, probably the thing that Tony and I have in common and that other trainers and I have in common are, doing a lot of work and getting tired and working to the point of exhaustion is kind of used to be a badge of honor. And we've learned enough to know that that's not necessarily the best way to train now. Fatigue actually, creates a bunch of cortisol and it prevents us from performing at a high level. And if we don't get to perform at a high level, then we don't ever really know what that feels like. And the central nervous system is very adaptable. And so we want it to be exposed to those kind of stimulus. So it's kind of getting them out of the mentality of, hey, we got to do more and we got to do fitness, cardiovascular, type work. They get plenty of that in the pool. So our focus was to say, hey, let us really focus on the development of the central nervous system, fast twitch muscle fiber recruitment. And the single best way to do that is to sprint. And so that's where our training system and programming goes in of, we do take even swimmers or golfers or, name the sport. Doesn't necessarily have to be a running sport. And we feel like we can move the needle by having a speed development component that changes how fast their body moves. And so, we improve somebody's speed on the track when they're running, then we know that they're going to be able to kick faster, pull faster, all the things that happen in the water. And I'm not a proficient swim guy. We kind of look at our training system as sport agnostic. We're going to train most athletes the same. Obviously, there's little idiosyncrasies and variations between each sport. And we do a lot of stuff with shoulders and postural stuff with the swimmers, obviously. But everything else is, we kind of are training that energy system. So it's a little bit different approach of, instead of trying to be so sport specific, we kind of move away and just stay specific to an energy system, which is that high performance, high output, speed development.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about energy systems because in swimming, we're so caught up on energy systems. And when primarily, someone created a famous chart a few years back, 20, 30 years ago, where it was kind of like a color system, where it's like, if you're in this heart rate zone, you're this color. If you're in this heart rate zone, and the colors change as you go up. So everybody bases their training around this color system. But a lot of what swim training primarily has been based around is being focused on threshold building, and VO2 max type work, right? So it's been, and that's been where the majority of the program has been written up. So it's like a traditional swim program, you would say, would be 8 to 9 workouts a week traditionally, and you're swimming about 5 to 6 kilometers per workout, right? So you're looking at somewhere between 40 to 50 kilometers per week, let's say, at a minimum type thing. So, in order to train for an event that lasts less than a minute, these athletes are training 50 kilometers per week. I think a lot of people are now questioning, why are we doing this?
That's right. Yeah. And, there's a certain level of energy system development that needs to happen and speed reserve for longer distances. And even in sprint events, to have a little bit of that in there is okay. We just know that because those, philosophies exist out there, we just know that in our system, we're going to make sure that we really tilt the other way and hit that central nervous system, with high output, because we know that they're not getting it in other places. And what we found is, I mean, even stacking those workouts together consistently, 2-3 days a week, 4 days a week, even of high level sprinting, can create kind of an efficiency or a output that is so high that it almost creates a more fit or a more an endurance type of a environment, because they're so proficient or so powerful in the water, on the ground. And so it's just a little bit of looking at it differently. We always say, do you want to get really good at running slow or moving slow, or do you want to be very efficient at moving fast and powerful? And, not only is it more digestible to the athlete, which makes it fun, which makes training, more apt to be, followed through on. It also, scientifically makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. When you look at it from a track sense, right? If you look at anyone that runs on the track and they run the 100 or the 200, they're running at full speed with beautiful technique. But a lot of people don't look at that in terms of swimming, and if you're swimming a 50 or 100 freestyle, for instance, the 50 is going to take you somewhere around 21 seconds.
Right.
The 100 is going to take you about 47 seconds. So it's very similar to what they're doing kind of like on the 200 for the track, or maybe a 400 on the track, but it's all less than a minute type stuff. So in terms of the specificity, there should be a lot of speed building, power building, strength, stability, explosiveness,
That's right.
And the endurance is built up around the speed training, I believe. Right. So that's one of the questions that comes up a lot, is that how do you then periodize for speed? Because traditionally in swim programs, they've said, well, we've got to build a base, right? The base is we're going to build around aerobic swimming, and that's going to be the base that you're going to have to fall back on later once we start doing faster things, right? You'll have this huge base of work behind you. So if we're going to flip that and say, well, we still need a base of speed and strength, how then do you periodize for building speed and strength?
Well, this will probably make several coaches and or performance staffs cringe.
Good.
I believe that there's not necessarily the need to periodize so much with speed and power, because it's something, first of all, that takes years to develop. I feel like the aerobic system is something that can be developed in a fairly short amount of time. But speed and power and that central nervous system training can take years. And so the periodization of it really becomes, like you said, the building blocks or the foundation has to be that you're doing those things consistently. And because you can't overload a speed day, let's say, whether it's in the water or not in the water, it doesn't really matter. You can only put out at 98, 99, 100% so many times in a workout. And so you have to, stagger that with rest and recovery so that you're able to hit those high percentages. And then stacking those things, over the course of time becomes your periodization. So really, it's hard to say, hey, we're going to start with a base of speed and we're going to just run slow for 10 repetitions today, because now you're not really working speed. So it's almost like you have to throw periodization out the window at some level and say, here's what we're going to do. 3 days a week. Now with your swim workouts, if there's, somebody who swims the 500, then they need a little bit of an aerobic capacity, right? They need that speed reserve. But we're still going to not necessarily change the way that we program for their speed development. They still have to hit 100%. So we don't have a lot of room to go backwards. In fact, if something isn't done at 85, 90% or greater, we're probably not even working in the right energy system for what we're trying to accomplish. So, I'm not trying to get into the weeds on that necessarily, but it is a little bit, I guess, counter to what like the culture of strength and conditioning would say of build a base, work up, start low, increase intensity, as you go. We feel like it takes a lot of practice and a lot of exposure to that to move the needle. And so we're going to kind of go to the top of that pyramid and almost work backwards, flip it upside down. We're always going to run fast and give exposure to those things because it takes just years to develop.
Wow. It's fascinating. And listen, there's an athlete out there in the swimming world right now by the name of Cam McAvoy, which kind of everybody's studying right now. And Cam just won the world championship. He's an Australian athlete. Just won the world championship in the 50 freestyle, and he's basically removed all aerobic activity from what he's doing. So
Yep.
he's doing exactly what you're talking about. He's swimming at top speed a lot. He's building strength and power in the gym and explosiveness, and he's stacking that on top of rest and recovery. So it's really fascinating. A lot of people will say, well, that will work for a very short race like the 50 freestyle where you're swimming for about 21 seconds, but it doesn't have the same effect for somebody that wants to swim 100, which would be more like the 400 on the track.
Right.
Can a 400-meter runner on the track train like this and be as effective as they want to be?
I got a great story for you. In 2019, we had a 4x4 relay, so 4x400 meter relay squad. We had one senior girl and 3 sophomores, and a couple of them were multi-sport athletes. But mostly, I mean, we were all speed and power, and rarely did we run over 150 meters in a practice, in a workout. And so we definitely fell under that model of, we're going to make you as fast and as efficient as possible. We're going to stack some anaerobic work to create a little bit of capacity. We're going to race kind of into shape. And those girls set the state record in the 4x4 relay by almost 6 seconds. They ran 3:41. I think it was the number 5 time in the country that year. And again, these were not, high volume. It's the 400. So you have to run 500s and 600s, kind of the old school mentality. It was all based in speed and power. So the answer to your question is a definitive yes. You can get it done without the aerobic thing. It's wonderful to hear that there's a high level swimmer out there kind of, messing around with what's normal and having success with it. Because we definitely believe from our seat that, it's definitely possible.
Yeah. Well, not only is he having success with it, he's a world champion and
Right.
his favorite to win the gold medal next year in Paris, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
But he's getting a lot of pushback.
Sure.
And a lot of people are hoping that he doesn't succeed. The ones on the outside that are snickering, and the ones that are stuck on, this is the traditional way of doing things. They're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's doing. And then the other thing that they fall back on is that, well, he did years of base work as a teenager. So that's why he's able to now swim faster as an adult, because of the years of base work. It's just like that's
Sure.
the argument they give.
Yeah. And you can, at some level, it's like, who's got the marker on the whiteboard last? You know what I mean? It's like, you can try to figure out a whole bunch of different, things that may or may not have had influence in that. I think, one of the things that I've always loved about what Tony Holler likes to talk about is, what kids enjoy, they love and they're good at. And so, athletes are the same way. If they enjoy the training and psychologically they're bought into what they're doing, then they're going to have success. And I was in Dallas yesterday with my VP of Ops who trains our swim group here. And he was telling me how, our swimmers, don't get me wrong, they are not pretty sprinters. They don't run well. There's a reason why they're good in the water, not on land. But they have now gotten to a point where they actually enjoy it so much. They request to run fly 10s. They request to get tested. They've kind of gotten into the competitiveness of that. And so we're getting this really high output on the ground sprinting with a group of really elite level national caliber high school swimmers. It's been kind of an interesting experiment to see even the psychology around it of how they're bought into it. And I don't know if we'll ever know if that's a 1-for-1 when they hit the water. But they're enjoying it. They're having success. And it's been a nice addition to what they're doing. I don't think they've stopped swimming laps and miles and, all the things that come with, traditional swim workouts. But the supplementation of it has been a big difference maker for them.
Why do you think swimming is so far behind? Why do you think we're hanging on to this idea of the base and swimming miles and work and just piling on top. Like, to me, it still doesn't make sense why we swim 8 to 10 practices a week. Like, I just don't understand why we do that. And I'm questioning it. And I've certainly gone against that grain and had success with it myself.
Right.
But I just don't know why we're hanging on to that so much.
Well, for the first comment I would make is that I don't think you're alone. I really don't think swimming's probably any further behind in that mentality than soccer or football or lacrosse or any other major sport. Honestly, there's plenty of coaches out there that are stuck in that more is better. We have to outwork the competition mentality, and I think it's often a lack of knowledge of what that can do to the body. I think oftentimes athletes actually have success even overcoming their training regimen, frankly. We think they have to do all these things and check all these boxes when really what we need to do is get an athlete to the start line healthy, feeling fresh, and ready to roll. And obviously they can't just not train, but there's definitely thresholds and levels that I think we sometimes far exceed. And we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot in the last, I'd say 20 years, 40 years. But there's people coaching that have been coaching for 30 years and, they're not very willing to change what they've done, what they did when they were an athlete. And that's probably the biggest thing we fight when we talk and consult is, by golly, this is what we've done. It's done good for us. We don't want to make any major changes, Right. So that's probably more of what you run into is just, this is what's been done in swimming. And then the good coaches stay in coaching. They influence younger coaches. And so it's this kind of perpetual, historical training methodology that's just passed down from generation to generation.
Right. So, right. Yeah. We're trying to shift that now. We're starting a revolution in sprinting and in swimming. So we're shifting it. But I wrote down some things here that, some things that just kind of come up a lot and questions that come up a lot. So I want to throw some of these at you. Resistance training in the pool. Why would that be beneficial, you think?
As far as any resistance training, any training in general, you're looking for to present a stimulus that causes adaptation. And so if you want strength in the pool or on the ground, to add a load to that movement is going to, help generate additional muscle fiber and synapses that occur to be able to do that work better when the load's not there. So It's just an overload principle, I think, that makes sense. I haven't seen a lot of obviously I watch your stuff and I see some of that stuff. I don't know if I fully understand the 1-for-1 of a, ground-based, land-based resistance versus a pool. But my guess would be that it's very much the same of just trying to find a adaptation to stimulus.
Well, when Christian has a resistance tool of some sort on him and he is striking the ground, what's he trying to do when he hits the ground and move that resistance forward? Like what's the point of all of it in terms of technically and the power that he's going to get from the training of that, Yeah,
it's all about force production, right? We're trying to apply force in the right vector. Really movement in general is physics. And so force application in one direction creates movement in the other direction. Newton's laws, all come into effect. And so, what we try to do is we try to take an athlete and we build them up through strength training, through sprint drills, through plyometrics, through all the different modalities of training to be able to generate more force. And that sometimes is where a lot of training groups or companies or whatever will stop, is because, for young kids, if you get them stronger, if you do plyometrics and stuff, they're going to have higher force output. They're going to get faster. They're going to move better. We like to take it a step further and make sure that those then are applied to the ground appropriately, through proper mechanics and through proper, where is the foot striking the ground. And again, there's not necessarily a 1-for-1 on the swim piece because the movement is so much different. At that point, we've kind of just really trained the central nervous system to move faster, whether they're flutter kicking or, the swim stroke, whatever it is, should be done at a higher power rate. But as far as movement on the ground goes with a football player like Christian, we're really hyper-focused on making sure there's no wasted movement, that there's not braking forces applied. We want things moving backwards to go fast forwards. And it's also a level of injury prevention. The more times you strike out in front of your mass, the more lower leg problems and knee problems and things like that you're going to end up with. So for us, it really is that twofold approach of let's create higher forces, and then let's make sure that those forces are applied properly through the right vectors, through efficiency.
It's interesting because as you talk, and I'm putting my swim brain into this,
Yeah.
I'm not picking up on anything that would be any different to swimming, right?
Right.
Like you talk about these things that are completely applicable to swimming, right?
Sure.
Like we're trying to generate a force, and we're trying to move, right, water backwards and
That's
a body forwards, and we're trying to do that with efficient technique as well.
That's right.
I mean, it all just makes sense to me. So like, if you're trying to run fast, there should be no real difference between trying to swim fast, right? It
Sure.
all applies in the same respect. And so a lot of the things that you see on my Instagram with some of these guys in terms of the resistance that they're doing it to create that power and that strength, but then apply it to force so that it's efficient,
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's the thing. Like when I've spoke even at clinics and I say, hey, we train swimmers and they get faster in the water by doing sprint training, and everybody scratches their head. And I can see why even swim coaches will be like, I don't see how that helps us move the needle, because they don't think there's a 1-for-1. But what they don't realize and understand is like the energy system is all encompassing, like how they come off the block, how hard and fast their hand comes through the water, how powerfully they can kick.
Yes.
All those things can be enhanced by, stimulating the central nervous system, which again, the only way to do that at the highest level is to sprint. So, I mean, I'm certain that it could be done in the water as well. If I was programming as a swim coach, which I'm not a swim coach, I would think that a 50 free guy would probably want to, have lots of 15 to 20 meter maximum output.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe loaded, maybe contrasted, loaded, unloaded, where they're getting, high outputs that then stacked together, they're going to go out and crush a 50, and we'll kind of hang on a little bit at the end if we're not fit.
How much rest and recovery would you think you would need to have a high quality workout like that and then come back and do it again?
I think if you're talking really high quality, you probably need about 48 hours.
48 hours.
Because again, it's more neural, it's central nervous system versus your muscles. Muscles are pretty adaptable. Your lungs are even more adaptable, right? That's why you can go out and jog every day, because it's at a very low output aerobic capacity. That's a low burn rate. But on the high burn rate, activity of a 20 meter, swim, at the highest capacity for 4 or 5 reps, you're going to be tipped over from that. Not necessarily physically tired, but you might be neurally fatigued. And so we wouldn't want to repeat that for another, probably at least day and a half to 2 days. And I know swim is pretty, classic of 2 a days, swim in the morning, swim at night kind of stuff. And I think you could probably intermittently put in longer, slower swims.
Right.
In between, because I think there's still a level of energy system development that has to take place. I'm certain of it. But like a pure sprinter, the guy from Australia, probably, people are dumbfounded when I tell them that Christian only really trains 3 days a week. We train Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 90 minutes. The off days are spent in recovery, rest. We actually get in a pool, ironically, for his training on the off days, and do a lot of mobility and spinal engine kind of work with him. But I think you have to space those really intense workouts out every other day. Right.
In terms of what he's doing kind of on the land, and then what he's doing in the gym to build strength, right? Like moving weight, pushing weight, pulling weight, strength training, as opposed to speed training. How do you mix those together? How do they blend together? Is it speed training one day on the land, and then 24 hours later he's in the gym, and then 24 hours later he's back on the land, to give that 48 hours? Or is it only 3 times a week where it's combined?
We combine them 3 days a week. We basically have themed workouts on those days, like might be an acceleration themed day. It might be a max velocity type day. might be a change of direction, kind of agility type day. And so we're going to do all those in one day and try to get all that work in. We're going to do movement first so that we're fresh and rested and able to move at that high output, followed by a weight training or a strength session. And typically the weight room or the strength resistance work is going to support whatever we did in movement, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we're not a big, upper body, lower body, or, different push-pull systems. It really is truly like what moves did we do in acceleration that now need to be supported in the weight room of a lunge movement or a trap bar deadlift, or, what makes sense with those exercises to support those. We feel like the weight room should look like sprinting, or should look a little bit like, and I don't mean one for one, like it's got to look like running, but it should support the things that we're trying to enhance in regards to whatever theme we're after: max velocity, acceleration, etc. So we truly do space those out every other day. And then the off days are spent in what I really call, recovery workouts. We still will maybe spend 45 to 60 minutes doing movement-based stuff, gymnastics, locomotion. It might be a day we get in the water and do some, good movement kind of stuff, breathing, sauna treatments, different things like that to let the system fully recover and repair so that when we come back for the next one, it can also be a high output day.
How do you think like an active recovery like that helps the system recover? Like, why wouldn't you just completely do nothing as opposed to going in and doing some type of active recovery?
Sure. I always say that's a game time decision, day to day, because I do believe there are some of those days where you should just not get off the couch because you're fatigued, you're tired, there's cortisol present, stress hormones are high, and a day away would be very healthy and good for them. So we often, Tuesday is typically a pretty big active recovery day for us. Where I think it does cause blood flow and some stimulus to try to accelerate the healing for that next day. But then oftentimes we get to a Thursday and we may or may not do anything on that day based on how they're feeling, which again is another one of those periodization, I guess, flies in the face of periodization, when you're sometimes just going to pivot and go off the plan because it's best that the athlete is rested and recovered. We're typically going to substitute an off day for a day of work more often than not, just to make sure that they stay healthy.
Yeah. Now, one of the other arguments I hear a lot too, and I don't know how much weight you put into this, but you're talking about Christian McCaffrey, one of the top, NFL players, professional athlete, man. I'm talking about Cam McAvoy, one of the top swimmers in the world, who's 29 years old. So they say, well, that's fine for those people, but how does it apply then to the youth? When do you start strength training? When do you start speed training? When do you start all of the things that you're doing, or some similarities with what Christian's doing? When do you start that?
Sure. Well, I always, obviously it's easy to work with Christian McCaffrey. I mean, not in certain regards, but he's a very talented athlete. I deal with a lot of talented athletes that are easy to coach. Our system doesn't change from a youth athlete to a professional athlete. The volume and the loads and the frequency of which we do things changes a lot. But we still do very similar type of stuff, just regressed for the younger athletes. And the answer is, for sprinting, that's the beauty of having a speed-based program, is it's good for everybody. It's very low-hanging fruit. It's what they need to move the needle. And we're not talking about putting them in super overloaded weight training situations where potentially it could do more harm than good. So we lay off some of those things and just make them proficient movers from a very young age. We work down even with alpha kids age 5 to 8 just on good basic human movement, and then progress them into some speed work around age 9 or 10. And kids love to run. They love to sprint. They love to be timed. And those are things that are all exposing them to that high performance without the risk of, burnout, or, not everybody loves to lift weights, to get under a back squat bar and squat. So we try to make that very digestible for them.
What about in terms of this base building that we, often hear about? Let me fix this mic real quick. This base building we often hear about, for kids is like, you build this aerobic base when they're younger. So you're talking about bringing speed in earlier. So how then does that move as or change as they mature and as they get older? What are the shifts from, like a 10-year-old to an 18-year-old?
Sure. You know what? Like, it doesn't change much, frankly. Now, again, it's hard because I could probably spend a whole 2 hours just breaking down the little idiosyncrasies of, a 10-year-old, training day versus a 25-year-old training day. And obviously they would look very different. But when it's based in this, you just don't have to have as much attention to the what versus the maybe the how, if that makes sense. So, the what is still going to be, we're going to sprint. We're going to sprint the 10-year-old. We're going to sprint the 25-year-old. I just got done with a session today with a couple of pro soccer girls, and they're back on their break, and their workout doesn't look a whole lot different than McCaffrey's workout or than, a 12-year-old that's just getting started. It's just, again, a matter of like the volume, and are we going to spend more time in mechanics and efficiency before we head into kind of high output? The answer is yes, obviously. But we kind of feel pretty good about, hey, everybody does this and they like it. And it seems to be moving the needle for all age groups and all demographics.
Yeah. It's interesting you say the proficiency. We talk a lot about technique, the swim technique, and I do a lot of clinics, and I'm doing clinics all around the world now, and I travel the world, and I see huge problems in technique and the way kids are swimming. Now, if I emphasize the technique for 5 minutes, the kids pick it up like that because they've been taught the right technique and they know the right technique, but they're not constantly training the right technique. So as soon as I put those cues in, as soon as I put that awareness on it, they pick up on it like that. And their technique looks beautiful for a very short amount of time. But then they go back to their programs and it's all based around volume and how much you can do in a certain amount of time. And so they lose that technique again. So it just goes back to just pounding. And then they have, issues with their shoulders specifically in swimming because they're just going through the motions of really poor technique constantly.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we spend, we have a series, we call it Bounce Fire series. Our swimmers do it. Our football players do it. Everybody does it. It generates, thousands, if not millions of ground contacts over the years of doing it. It promotes the right way to ground strike and how to produce force and not lose force production, through the ground strike. And it's just something that we're very passionate about because we know that it moves the needle. And, to your point, if a kid's going to always go back to what they have done the most, then we want them to defer back to all the reps that they've taken in the efficiency, proficiency, movement piece. And so that's something that we work on a lot. When you can only run maybe 2 or 3 fly 10s in a session, you better have a whole bunch of other things that you're working on, and so for us, that's kind of our, call it volume of work that hopefully is going to set in some patterns for their life as an athlete. And, I think that's what we've done well is that's just something it's sometimes not very creative. It's boring sometimes, but we're a big like mastery type of an environment where we want them to take one thing kind of an inch wide, a mile deep, and get really good at it before we just start throwing all these different things at them. Because to your point, if somebody runs poorly, they got a chance to get injured. And that's the last thing we want is, the best athlete's the available athlete.
When would a kid go from learning technique and speed and agility and, kind of stability? When would they go from that to then going into the gym to build strength?
Yeah. We're going to build strength from the jump. Now we might not take a kid in the weight room and put them under a bar or have them lift a ton of weight. But as far as like just even their own body weight of, plyometric movements and isometric movements, and then a gradual exposure to some overloading principles, just to have a kid do some basic plyometric movement puts a pretty good load on the body, but it's got very low risk in regards to injury or joint problems or things like that. So I think it's just it's a gradual exposure to that. Where, at some point, we want our more experienced athletes, higher level high school, collegiate, professional athletes, there's a need for exposure to some strength training, right? There's hormone benefits, there's, bone density and all the things that they get out of the weight room. But, for a young kid, I mean, we might do something with a medicine ball or, lunging or body weight kind of stuff, exposing them to strength levels that can be very significant for them in their athletic development that doesn't necessarily have to put them in the gym.
Right. What's the difference? Because these two words are often grouped together, speed and power. What's the primary difference between building speed and building power?
Power is just speed and strength combined. So really, speed is a component of both of those things, right? I mean, pure speed is speed, but power is actually strength and speed combined. So it's how fast can you move, a load, that load may be your body. So power training to me is much more important than strength training. We don't ever really chase big numbers in the weight room. We'd much rather see you move weight fast and be able to be reactive and explosive in movement. And I do think that that's another arm of, because we train that way, it supports the speed, which then in turn supports whatever movement, whatever athlete is doing, and tying it all back to swim. That's when those kids get really good at being powerful in the water.
So traditionally in the gym, you go in there and you do 12 reps of something. You're not going in there as much to do that type of rep range?
No, we rarely go beyond 7 repetitions in anything we do.
Right.
So we kind of feel like 1 to 3 repetitions is really our power range of reps. 4 to 7 reps is kind of our strength range. And then anything 8 and above is really more hypertrophy in nature. And there's not many athletes that need hypertrophy work, especially at the younger ages. We're going to let kind of the natural course of the body growing, do that for them. Some sports like football or rugby or contact sports, there's going to be a certain amount of muscle mass that's needed. But, as an example with swimmers, we certainly don't want to put a bunch of extra mass on them to pull through the water. So we want them to be as strong and powerful as possible with as little amount of body weight, add as we can. So that takes a certain programming to keep them from tearing down muscle fiber and having it regenerate and grow and, put weight on the scale. Yeah. Right. So that's another approach that we have. We call it mass specific force. Which is basically just that. I mean, how much output do you have per your body weight? And so for every pound or 2 or 3 or 4 of body weight that you put on, you have to have exponential strength to move that weight at the same rate. So we try to limit the amount of hypertrophy work that we do. So yeah, a set of 12 for us may only happen if it's maybe a med ball throw or something fairly light where a higher rep range is needed. But as far as moving weight, we're going to live in that probably 3 to 7 rep range most of the time.
Oh, good. That's a good answer. I like that. I appreciate that. That clears up a lot for people too. In terms of warming up, what's the idea behind warming up, and what are you trying to do when you warm up, and maybe even some specific exercises that gets the body warmed up?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think really it's blood flow, it's preparation, a little bit of potentiation for what you're doing that day. I think sometimes there's a lot of wasted energy or wasted output in a warm up. The body obviously needs to be ready for whatever's next, and that's why the potentiation piece is important. And it kind of depends on what you're doing that day. So for us, it's always going to be a build up to whatever the high end output is going to be that day. So if it's a fly 10 day, then we have to work up to be ready to sprint, fast that day. We're going to start by moving a little bit slower with a little locomotion so that we're hitting kind of triplanar movement, all 3 sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes. We're going to just move around a lot and get some mobility and activation. And, even in some of our warm-up drilling, we'll do some mobility and stability movements. So there might be some isometric movements and stuff in there to tighten things back up before we sprint. We don't want to be hypermobile. And again, sport dependent, different sports require different levels of movement. But for all athletes, we're going to focus on those triplanar deals. So we have kind of one of our staples in our facility is we do a locomotion series that has 3 levels to it. The first level being just basic jog, skip, galloping, kind of movements, but we are hitting all those three planes of movement. And then that can progress into a second and third level, which are very challenging. There's a coordinative component to it. Running fast and moving fast takes coordination. So we feel like challenging that system in the warm-up is a really good place to put that in. And we usually follow that up with, pardon me, I got a phone call, but okay. With like some SFT, the sagittal frontal transverse plane movements of squatting, hip drivers, push-ups, things like that, where again, we're just getting the body moving and prepared for what's next in the movement that we're going to do that day.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Had another question there in terms of taper, right? So taper is a big thing in swimming, and I'm sure you experience some of that in track and field, where you go to the biggest meet of the year, you want to be at your fastest. So in terms of what they're doing for strength and power and explosiveness in the gym, and then going onto the track and trying to run as fast as you can, how much of that is tapered off, and when would you do your kind of last workout, and how beneficial is it to kind of activation in the gym before you run really fast?
Absolutely. Yeah, obviously there's a general like unloading of the total volume as you head into a big competition. I think that's fairly standard. And, but there also, you have to take into consideration the central nervous system has the fast twitch. ATP has about a 3 to 8 day window where it'll start to kind of detrain or level off. And so you want to stimulate that, every about 3 to 8 days. And so a lot of people, I think sometimes they will taper too soon, which then kind of puts things offline by the time they go to a big competition. Right. So now, what stimulates the central nervous system? Well, a good healthy warm up and 1 or 2 repetitions at a really high level can be enough to spark that system to keep it on deck. And so, for us, it might be 4 or 5 days away from a championship track meet. Mm-hmm. We're going to still run maybe a fly 80 meters at full speed. Full recovery, maybe 1 or 2 repetitions. Again, just keep that nervous system firing and ready for that competition so that it doesn't get too relaxed or too away from, the exposure. And so, but generally it's going to just get less and less and less as you taper, as probably most coaches would naturally do, without neglecting still hitting a high output within that window of about 3 to 8 days before competition.
Right. I see this word advanced technologies being used. Sorry, my microphone's playing up again. Being used in this day and age. Are there any advanced technologies that you guys use to help you with your performance?
Yeah, we got a partner in Hawkin Dynamics, so we use force plate monitoring for a lot of our athletes in all of our facilities now. In regards to just, seeing where an athlete is on a day-to-day basis, not only from a readiness state, but also like, are they asymmetrical? Is their output high or is it low? Are they fatigued from the day before? And, those are the advanced technologies that we didn't used to have. It was more of a coach's eye of, boy, the team looks flat today, and that's, we all can see it, but now what we can do is actually put data to it. So between, the force plates and some of our TechnoGym technology that we have in our skill mill treadmills and our skill run treadmill, we can put an athlete on there and get these outputs and really kind of see like, hey, Susie's watts are really down today. She must be tired and fatigued. Let's modify her workout today. So we actually use quite a bit of technology, especially in the movement stuff, to be able to monitor these guys and optimize their training by sometimes backing off what we're doing, or
how do you feel about like a Whoop technology, something like a wearable technology?
Yeah, I think they're great for some people. I'm a guy that can't wear a Whoop because I would absolutely obsess over those numbers and every day. And my running joke is whether my readiness score is good or bad, I got to go anyway. So I don't really want to know.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way a little bit about that too. It's like I put it on and I'm like, well, it's telling me I'm not really ready, but I got to be ready.
I got to be ready. That's right. But I think for an athlete, that's probably a pretty good way to monitor and see kind of where they're at. I think it's an aha moment for a lot of athletes when they see, man, I really am not ready. And I do kind of have to go do this, but who's then monitoring that with them? If I say, hey, I'm not ready today based on my score, I'm low on sleep, is there going to be a coach that's going to be willing to give that kid a day off or a reduced workout to get them back in the green? Is kind of, that's going to take a cutting edge coach, somebody that's very trusting of the fact that probably the biggest indicator is going to be readiness. Is that kid fresh, healthy, and ready to go?
Yeah, I feel the same way in terms of just, I think it's a good education piece. Look, I think athletes should understand nutrition as much as they possibly can. Doesn't mean you have to be a nutritionist, but understanding that, understanding your heart, like understanding what your pulse is doing. I think just having an awareness of your body and really understanding what the signals are and what it's telling you, and figuring out at that point to say, well, yeah, today, like, it's telling me I really can't go, or it's just kind of giving me advice to say, you're not in a great shape, but you got to get out there and do it anyway, kind of thing. So yeah,
that's exactly right. I mean, what you don't want is an athlete to be like paralyzed by all the data and all the analytics. So we don't dive too deep into it, but we have ways for an athlete to come in 10 seconds, take 3 counter movement jumps, and we kind of know where they're at. And that may tailor their workout 10 or 15%. We're still going to work out, but it might give us better, idea of when to push, when to pull, on the total load.
Do you get to a point with a guy like Christian McCaffrey where you've maxed out, or are you always looking for something better, to get him stronger, faster, explosive? Like, can you get better with a guy like that?
Sure. I think the answer is yes, you can. I mean, I think how much you can move the needle is reaching the ceiling, right? Your ceiling's a little bit higher that you're working with. And I'm always looking for stuff that we can do to be better for him. I think a lot of it at an elite level athlete like that, and some of the others that I'm fortunate to work with, it becomes more about the individual needs. And a lot of them are bumped up and bruised up, and they've dealt with injury and whatnot. And so a lot of your training looks a little bit more like therapy, where you're really trying to get their bodies back to normal kind of homeostasis leading into the season. And yes, we're going to still touch, for the same reason that your nervous system starts to deteriorate after 3 to 8 sessions or 3 to 8 days. We still need to add that to their regimen. They still need to, in season, hit a little bit of strength exposure, hit a little bit of speed exposure. They can't just put it on the shelf and do nothing because they've reached a certain level, or they will start to fall off. So I think then it just becomes much more of a finite. You're tuning a Lamborghini, you're not building a Chevy truck, if that makes sense.
Right. Actually, I just thought of something else, a really good question that I wanted to ask you, because we get this a lot too, is like specialization in kids and when's too early, but more so around the identification of who's a sprinter and who's not, right? Like, I think a lot of swim coaches say, well, it's too early to determine whether they're a sprinter or not until they're 17, 18. And I disagree with that. I think a lot of sprinters are getting killed in the pool because we're not identifying young enough. And we're kind of putting them in these programs where it's just like one size fits all. So how would you recommend we go about identifying talent in speed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some real validity to testing, and recording, taking accurate data on what these athletes do when they come in. I know what we would do from a track and field perspective of, a lot of data testing up front to see what's your vertical jump, what's your force output, what's your fly 10, how do you accelerate, what's your max velocities look like. Then we can kind of talent identify that athlete into a certain event group, whether it's a sprinter, a jumper, a hurdler. And we had done that for years. USA Track and Field has actually a full formula of things to put in on data and testing to kind of, try to identify talent. In the water, I would think you could do almost the same kind of a thing, run some different testing type of stuff. And if a kid has a propensity, even in regular performance training, we test all of our swimmers here for vertical jump, for fly 10s. And I would guess, I have a hunch that the sprinters that are good sprinters are probably testing higher than some of the ones that aren't. And so it would lend itself to say, you should probably be doing some of that kind of testing, and that might help you push kids into one or the other.
Yeah, I tell this story. I had a trip to South Africa recently, and I had this. I did this clinic, and there was about 40 kids in the clinic, and had this kid at the back of the lane, and he just kind of wasn't paying attention. He was just playing around, and we were going through drills and skills, and it was kind of mundane, a little bit boring, but stuff that they needed to know and understand. And so we did this for about an hour and a half, and this kid was just kind of playing around, wasn't paying attention, wasn't listening. And at the end, we said, okay, well, let's get up on the blocks and we'll go fast. And he immediately got to the front of the block and went up first and just smoked everybody. And the South African coaches at the end were like, how do you identify a sprinter? I'm like, I don't know, but I know that guy's a sprinter.
That's right. That's right.
He's one.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I guess you got to kind of see, right. And put them in there. And I mean, I was a guy that is a track athlete. I love the speed power events. But anything over the 400 meters, I was terrified of. I didn't love that, and it wouldn't have taken very long of a couple tests to figure that out, pretty quickly to identify where, I might have fit in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, man, I've taken an hour of your time. I appreciate it. It's been cool. I think we could talk for hours. And where can people find you and more of you?
Sure. Yeah, no, our website is kulasp.com. And we got some information on there if anybody, wants anything. Our Instagram is at Kula Sports Performance. I also have a personal page of at Brian Kula, Brian with an I. And I love talking shop. I love connecting with people. And if there's anything we can do to help out there, we'd love to. We have our new KSP Global coaching digital platform where we can do some remote training for athletes across the globe. So if there's some people out there that aren't getting the help that they want, reach out and we can probably get you and or your club helped out.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for your time, mate. It's been awesome. It's just continuing the conversation for us, and it's very much needed in swimming. So thanks a lot.
I love it. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Brett.
All right. Take care, man.